Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the session on Virtuous Agriculture of ESOF 2020. The session is starting now. I am Laura Laposta, a sustainability editor of Il Sole 24 Ore, Italian financial newspaper, and I am actually in New York now. It is my pleasure to welcome you, delegates of ESOF 2020, both online and in Trieste, to this important conference on a new, more sustainable way of doing agriculture and feeding human beings. The urgent necessity to address climate change is what brought us here, and it is what brought Andrea Illy, distinguished team of scientists, to elaborate a new model for agriculture. We have to keep in mind that agriculture is actually responsible for 25% of all the greenhouse gases emissions. So this is really a big issue, and we have to find a new model to go on. We will discuss this challenge with a panel composed of very inspirational speakers, and I will introduce them now. Mr. Andrea Illy is in the room in Trieste. Hello, Mr. Illy. Good morning. Good afternoon, Laura. For you. Hello.
Thank you.
So Andrea Illy is a 100% family-owned company president, chairman of the group, and his company was founded in 1933 with the mission of offering the best, the greatest coffee to the world, which they do, as I can show you here. And, you know, for 22 years, he served as a CEO of the company. He's a chemical, but he describes himself as a humanist chemist. So he will talk about this new model of virtuous agriculture he has in mind with a great team of scientists. The second panelist is Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Welcome, Jeff. Hi. He's a world-renowned economist professor of Columbia University. Everybody knows him, of course. He is in New York, actually now, very close to my home. You know that he is a United Nations senior consultant, best-selling author, global leader in sustainable development. And actually is the director of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So Thank you for being with us, Professor Sacco.
Hey, thank you.
The third panelist is Professor Paolo De Castro, and I hope he will connect soon. He is the chair of European Parliament Committee on Agriculture. And we will talk with him later, I hope. So now let's start from the beginning. Let's start from how this session works. Panelists have 20 minutes each, and I will also do some questions, and we will welcome questions from the audience as well. A panelist will answer our questions, and delegates can do questions both in the room, going to the microphone, and online in our online session, just texting the question on the Q&A feature. Now we start with Mr. Illy presentation, and he will talk us about virtuous agriculture, this new model. How can we help climate change from this point of view? I give you the floor, Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Virtuous Agriculture is the title. The name, you will understand, is about a virtuous cycle between the environment and human health. It's very contemporary at the time of COVID, because for sure the cause of COVID is the jeopardizing impact we had during our Anthropocene on ecosystems, and agriculture is part of that. We all know that according to the Paris Agreement, we need to be carbon-free by 2050. And this is the mother of all causes, because climate change is going to become irreversible if we don't stop it. And once it becomes irreversible, then it will eventually, over the millennials, literally compromise the conditions for life on our planet. So there is no other cause more important than that. And with this goal in mind, that I decided that all parties, including corporations, must do their parts and become carbon-free by 2050. How to do it? This is the point. So because Illy produces agricultural products, processed, roasted, and then served to a smiling customers, 8 million cups per day, but still we need to make sure that the overall supply chain becomes carbon-free. And this is why I took 1,000 hours of my time, a sabbatical, and went back to my books in order to seek this innovative model that I'm trying to go to present. So of course, agriculture must do its part in pursuing the goal of being carbon-free, because as said by our moderator, is responsible for 1/4 of the world greenhouse gas emissions, being the second largest contributor. But we also have on another page a problem with malnutrition, which impacts over 50% of the world population. And nutrition is a consequence of the agricultural activities. So although we have been able to produce enough calories after the beginning of the Green Revolution last century, we still didn't fix a global problem, because between undernourished people, between malnourished people with nutritional imbalances and obesity, we have over 50% having problems which eventually impact on their health. In this scenario, we also have to consider that the demography is continuing to grow, and we will have to produce more. So agriculture is not only a cause of the climate impact, but is also impacted by climate change. So we have to consider that agriculture is going to be compromised in terms of quality and quantity, so also in terms of productivity, as a consequence of the effect of climate change. So the solution in this model, luckily, is in the soil. The soil, healthy soil, are connected with healthy humans. This is what I'm trying to demonstrate. Because, so soil, from the environmental point of view, is responsible for this, organic carbon is responsible for the soil health. There is an average of 3–4% organic carbon in the soil, which is responsible for the microbiota of the soil, which is in turn is responsible for the natural defenses of soils, and eventually, as we will see, the quality, nutritional quality of food. So, diet influence our health. Now, one of the reasons why some countries have not been so reactive towards COVID is because most of the diseases and the sanitary system, consequently, are organized for non-communicable diseases, which are by far the #1 cause of death. And there is a very, very strong correlation between non-communicable diseases and lifestyle with food and nutrition on top. So we need to seek food systems which are beneficial for both the people and the planet. This, in my understanding, is the best possible way to incentivize all stakeholders in this long supply chain from soil, from farm to fork, as we will hear, the new strategy of the European Union, and create this incentive, which is mostly based on the quality of life. So agriculture of today. Agriculture of today, first of all, we have to consider that it involves 20% of human population. It's a gigantic market, which is generating over 6 trillion per year. And is a market which also, strangely, is heavily subsidized, with 1 billion subsidized per day. So we shall have probably a strategic use of these subsidies in order to trigger the change that we need. Agriculture is responsible for 20% of global emissions, but all in terms of carbon dioxide, 20%, but also 50% of methane. Methane is 25 times worse than CO2 as greenhouse gas, and 75% of the nitrous oxide, which is generated by nitrogen fertilizers, which is 300 times worse than CO2 as a greenhouse gas effect. It's the main cause of deforestation and change of land use. Paradoxically, we would need over 100% of the cultivable land to feed the humanity in the next decades. We are now at 50% of land cultivated. 30% of the food produced is wasted. So this is a very, very, very first action to not only reduce emissions and improve the impact. Agriculture employs 70% of fresh water. 70% is very often in competition with cities. For instance, in Brazil, all the São Paulo city is constantly fighting with the Minas Gerais and the São Paulo state for water. But the problem of water is also about pollution, because unfortunately agriculture is the #1 polluter of waters. And there is also a problem with erosion caused by floods, caused by climate change. All in all, agriculture is responsible for jeopardizing these biogeochemical cycles, which are responsible for maintaining the living condition on the planet through homeostasis. So, as far as the impact of climate change on agriculture, every degree's temperature increase, we drop 1/4 of yields. So it's really a problem both in terms of mitigation of and adaptation. So going back to soil, which apparently is the solution, at least the trigger for healthy soils are rich with microorganisms. And these microorganisms are responsible for fertility, are responsible also for plant resilience, producing natural defenses against pathogens. Microorganisms are also responsible for better water retention. So, all in all, as a consequence of depletion of organic soil due to intense monoculture agriculture, we can say now that nature is upside down. Because on one side, nature has been providing the food that we need. On the other side, agriculture did jeopardize it. So the idea is to go back to feed the soil with organic matter, and by doing so, sequestering carbon from the air, and in synergy with the quality of the food produced, because you have less contaminants from agrochemistry and less fertilizers. So this is the dual benefit that the IPCC recommends to pursue in strategies fighting climate change. So examples of sustainable agronomical practices in order not only to adapt, but also to mitigate climate change. Luckily, this soil organic carbon enrichment represents a solution for both, reducing greenhouse gas emissions at the same time as making agriculture more productive and resilient to the effects of climate change. We all know from the market, organic and biodynamic, which is good, has been pioneering sustainable agronomical practices, although is per se not, let's say, productive enough because there are too many burdens. So it can be considered that it's still a niche and will remain maybe a growing niche. It could maybe reach 10%, miraculously 20%, but for sure never 100% of agriculture. But it has to be considered as one of the main sustainable practices. Integrated farming, putting together multi-crops together with animal husbandry. Agroforestry is the best, is very important, particularly in Africa, for so-called subsistence agriculture. It can represent a substantial amount of not only food production, but also carbon sequestration. Regenerative agriculture, which is basically pursuing the idea to grow and regenerate soils and ecosystem at the same time with virtuous practices. Virtuous agriculture can be described as a regenerative agriculture beneficial for health. So this is probably the closest model to virtuous agriculture. And agroecology is what put all this, the science, putting all this together, how to better manage waste management, carbon efficiency, productivity, and environmental impact. So in the last decades, one of the solutions to increase productivity and food quality has been genetically modified plants. There is still a backlash because the idea to introduce external genes into one organism is not accepted by the consumer. As we will see, the good news, genetical engineering is substantially improving and now is more closest to what we need to do in agriculture to solve our problems. There are many institutions studying the topic. I don't want to name them. I mentioned the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the Consortium for International Research Center in Agriculture, and others. And all in all, we can say a strategy centered around soil enrichment, no matter how, is the way to make agriculture more sustainable. Because everything starts with the earth, and all we have for this kind of dietary style we have, no matter if you want to be vegetarian, pescatarian, flexitarian, or vegan, or Mediterranean, we have always to keep in mind that all the food chain starts from plants, because animals, if we eat them, they are fed with plants. So it's just we can circumvent animal and increase our plant consumption. So as far as food today, because this is the idea of virtuous agriculture together with virtuous food. You know, we could live only upon food because it contains whatever we need, both from the, I don't want to make a long presentation about, but the focus in this case is on phytochemicals, which are contributing to our health. We have to consider that once we eat and we have enough of our ingredients, which are the structural components, carbohydrates, proteins, and fat, then we need micronutrients made by minerals and eventually, like our natural cures, preventative cures about diseases, these phytochemicals which are generated mostly by microorganisms. And these phytochemicals are produced by microorganisms, the so-called microbiota, which exist in the soil, in the plant, in the fruit, and in our body. So, food is rich in microorganisms as well as we are. Technically, humans are holobionts. I think only a minor percentage of our genome is a human genome. The rest of the genome, which is responsible for digestion and health, is the genome of the thousands of microorganisms which are living our body, particularly our digestive trait. So our microbiota, which is responsible for our health and digestion, without which we couldn't survive, is mostly established at birth, but it can be modified positively or negatively with our dietary. If we have problems with our microbiota and with our phytochemicals, inflammation is the trigger for most of the disease, the non-communicable diseases. And there is a very strong correlation between inflammation and altered microbiota. All in all, unhealthy diet, as said, is responsible for diseases, but that many often, besides inflammation, it also creates DNA damage, which creates then possible pathways for cancer. So, CVDs are responsible for, 670 million obese, 18 million people dying of CVDs every year, cancer 9, diabetes 1.6, responsible for most of the healthcare spending, which is 1.5 trillion just for CVDs. It is expected to reach, much higher figures in the future. So it's a kind of a pandemic. CVDs is a pandemic per se. And if only we would be capable of improving our diet, we could prevent as many as 10 million deaths per year. So food can be the cure. Let's try to put together the environment and our health and see what we can do. Food of tomorrow. As we have said, soils and humans both need microorganisms, and we need new food systems which are healthy, sustainable, safe, and protective. This is about the idea of the dual benefit recommended by the IPCC. Modern genetics can help with modern techniques which are not using interspecific genes as modification, but modifying intraspecifically the genes like it would naturally occur in nature by breeding, for instance, or natural selection. So this is better accepted and will represent a significant resource for the decades ahead in order to seek productivity, because it's not enough only to modify the agronomical practices. It's too late. We also need to improve the plant productivity, plant resilience, and plant nutritional quality. Emerging cutting-edge disciplines like bioinformatics, allowing to boost genetics, or like metabologenomics, once identified these phytochemicals, which is good for health, identifying its gene and the microorganism responsible, and then in agriculture, let's say, stimulate the production of this agriculture richer in this kind of microorganism. So many promising scientific disciplines and practices to be applicable in agriculture in order to boost this journey towards the double benefit. So let me give let's say, definition of what I consider the impact of food on health. Food, of course, must be safe. This is about the HACCP, because of course it needs to be free from pathogens. But pathogens are still a problem in many parts of the poor countries. Food needs to be healthy. Only 35% of foods produced by the food industry are considered to be healthy. Healthy means, in this case, free of contaminants, or healthy because it has the right nutritional composition. But what is the ultimate goal is to protect our health, to have a positive health impact on our health. And this is about the richness of these beneficial phytochemicals which can be present in food with better agronomical practices. So in order to bridge this world of agronomy together with the world of nutrition, many things need to change. It's about a cultural change. It's about introducing new reforms. It's about more strategic use about agricultural subsidies. It's about dietary changes, eating less meat, in general, eating less animal proteins, and of course, the impact of new varieties developed with genomics. And in order to do so, we will need to build a very strong and solid agricultural database, world database. So in order to trigger this revolution, growers and consumer interests need to be aligned. Because if the demand of consumer for foods with a double benefit is, of course, intercepted by growers, then they will probably have higher profits. Organic food is already quite a good business per se, because it charges 10% premium compared to non-organic food. And this can only improve, because also virtuous sustainable agriculture practices is cheaper compared to the dependence from the agrochemistry. Also because we have to imagine that in the future we shall start paying for the environmental costs, which is a hidden cost, or used to be a hidden cost until now, but now it's so evident that whatever you do has an environmental cost, which will need to be paid. So similarly to the carbon tax for driving your car or taking your airplane, agriculture will need to have the equivalent of carbon taxes, or carbon taxes itself, embedded in the price of the food that we buy. This will probably also change the inflation behavior in the society, because it's the only way to finally address the issue. Of course, this will have consequentially a very strong impact on the trade chains. So what about now as a definition of virtuous agriculture, we can say it's a food system with an environmental benefit obtained through soil organics enrichment, dietary change and genetic improvement that produces foods which are healthy and protective against non-communicable diseases. This is the best possible definition of the model, which might seem utopistic. Maybe, for sure, it's not the silver bullet, because there is no such thing as a silver bullet, but is one of the possible models, along with others, which are under study today. So it will require a business model, which is all centered, as you can see, on data. So it can only be pursued and implemented thanks to the ultimate resource of our age, which is artificial intelligence. It's a huge big data, putting together big data from agriculture together with big data from nutrition and health. And this is the way where we can extract knowledge and eventually find new ways of producing. It needs to be a transparent market, also for building consumer trust. Transparent directly, not necessarily with certification or complicated systems, bureaucratic, which makes things more difficult. Of course, it needs to be open, otherwise we won't get enough data from the market. And the way to possibly, as we are thinking, pursue that model is divided in phase. We are currently running an unsupervised machine learning to see whether we can find correlation between nutrition and agronomy. And from there, we will start studying single ingredients, starting the agronomical condition for maximizing the benefits, and then continue by starting using metabolomics, and finally, probably decades ahead, also impact with personalized nutrition, because each individual reacts differently to foods. So why embracing virtuous agriculture? Because of the double benefit. It's also significantly beneficial in terms of SDGs. I don't know how many SDGs are listed there, but probably at least 10. There is a journey. We are now working. I'm presenting the ideas. At the same time, we're running the machine learning kind of prototype to build a proof of concept. And the year ahead, we are going to set up a governance and start funding. Thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation. And I will then, at the end of the session, be ready to answer some Q&A.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much for your valuable contribution to this panel and to sustainable development. I will come to you later with some questions. But now I would like to hear Professor Sachs' views on virtuous agriculture. What do you think, Jeff? Is this a sustainable agriculture, not only from the, agricultural point of view, but also sustainable economically, since you are an economist? Can we fix agriculture with that? Thank you.
Thanks very much, and what a pleasure to be part of this year's forum, and also what an honor to follow Andrea Illy. I have my Illycaffè in hand, as I do every day, and also to precede Paulo de Castro, who will be speaking after me. Andrea Illy's presentation on virtuous agriculture is extremely important because it points to the centrality of agriculture in all of the challenges that we are facing now. And I think that this is the most important point for our consideration. We are in the midst of a large number of major disruptions and crises. Of course, COVID-19 is the most evident of them, but as Andrea just indicated, climate change and other threats are of tremendous significance and urgency. And we need a holistic approach to get out of this mess. And agriculture is one of the keys to a holistic strategy. I think it's important for us to keep in mind overall the idea of sustainable development, which is the globally agreed concept that our economy should function not only to produce a high average output per person, but also social fairness, so social justice, and also environmental sustainability. It's the triple bottom line of economic, social, and environmental goals, not the single bottom line of the balance sheet that's going to save us and that's going to produce a decent world for us. And when we think about the big challenges that we face, we can see where agriculture is really central for solutions. So on the environmental side, we have at least 4 interconnected crises. COVID is most vivid. That is a zoonotic disease. It is a transfer from animal to human populations of a killer pathogen. And this is happening more and more frequently because humans are disrupting the biosphere. In this case, it's probably a transfer from bat populations to human populations in southwest China. We don't know for sure, but that's the most likely circumstance. But we've had many other emerging diseases in recent years that are of a similar phenomenon. We have long-term human-induced climate change as a second pillar of environmental risk. We have the loss of biodiversity through deforestation taking place in the Amazon, taking place in all of the great biomes of the world and the oceans at the same time. And we have mega pollution. We have the plastics pollution and so on. Well, as Andrea said, if you look at the drivers of those environmental changes, even the zoonotic diseases, the loss of forest cover, the destruction of biomes and biodiversity, the human-induced climate change, the mega pollution, you'll find that agriculture is a huge driver of all of these because, not surprisingly, the system that we depend on to feed the world and that is the source of livelihoods for more people than any other single livelihood in the world has the biggest single burden on the physical environment. And for a long time, we were thinking, well, just got to grow food, just got to grow food. But when we did that, the result was massive environmental destruction and bad health because the diets also became incredibly imbalanced. As many food companies learned how to make highly processed, sugar-laden foods that contributed to the obesity epidemic right now. So we ended up with food, but not healthy food. We ended up with environmental destruction. We ended up with massive loss of carbon to the atmosphere, contributing to the greenhouse effect. It's a mess. And we ended up also with huge, huge injustices because billions of people around the world actually cannot afford a healthy diet right now. You know, FAO made a very interesting report, very important report last month on the state of food insecurity in the world. And they usually have a number that they call hunger, which is around 850 million people right now. Hunger, in that simple definition, is not having enough calories to eat. But this time they did something, I think, much better, which was they said, what about not just calories, but healthy diet? Who can afford that? And then lo and behold, they showed that 3 billion of the world's 8 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. In other words, maybe 2 of those 3 billion can afford the carbohydrates for the calories. But what about the proteins? What about the micronutrients? What about all of the benefits of eating vegetables and fruits and other foods that are more expensive per calorie than getting sugar in a soda or getting a refined grain, which is obesogenic? So this crisis of inequality also interacts with agriculture in a very, very major way. Well, suffice it to say, we therefore need an integrated, holistic approach to solve a whole set of complex challenges. And Andrea Illy's powerful idea of virtuous agriculture is in line with a number of initiatives, as he mentioned. There has been something called the EAT Forum, which published an important paper in The Lancet on how to combine healthy diets and environmental sustainability of the farm sector itself. In the project that I lead for UN Secretary General Guterres, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, we have a project called FABLE, F-A-B-L-E, which stands for Food, Agriculture, Biodiversity, Land Use, and Energy. And it's designed to look at land use from a holistic perspective. In other words, land to grow food, but also land to store carbon, land to protect and be home to biodiversity, land for siting renewable energy. How should we use our land? You know, it's strange. Governments don't have a very clear idea about that. The idea of land use is very tricky when you have 5 or 6 fundamentally competing uses. And some of our leaders are just basically parroting one particular lobbying group out of many. So unfortunately, President Bolsonaro in Brazil, for example, okay, he represents agro-industry in Brazil, but the rainforest is burning down. And where are the ecologists? They don't have a voice in Bolsonaro's politics. And so the trick with land use is to say not just one goal, but multiple goals. Well, that's complicated. And we don't have a map that says this place is for nature, this place is for food, this place is for this biodiversity, this place is for storing carbon, this place is for putting a wind turbine or a solar field. But we need that, actually. We need to know how to use the land to meet the multiple objectives that have been set. So let me finally say, this is an idea whose time has come. It's urgent. We will not succeed in sustainable development. We won't even head off the next pandemic unless we focus on sustainable agriculture and sustainable land use. And I want to end as an intro to the next speaker, if I could, because Europe is the part of the world that's in the lead on this. This is very important. It's not far in the lead because it has to implement now, but it is in the lead for sure in the spirit and in the design of a way forward. I'm a huge, huge fan of the European Green Deal. The idea that Europe as a whole, through the European Union, will pursue sustainable development through a Green Deal and a major, roughly $2 trillion recovery and investment program. This is a great idea. There are 3 pillars to the European Green Deal, though I stand to be corrected by the great expert who's going to follow me on this, Paulo de Castro. But the 3 pillars that I see are the energy pillar, shifting to renewable energy. The second pillar is circular economy, basically clean up after ourselves and stop putting toxics into the environment. And the third, of which our speaker is lead author and instigator, the farm to fork strategy, which is a comprehensive, integrated strategy for virtual agriculture. So this points the way forward. And I think it's extremely timely, Andrea's initiative. It links up with farm to fork, but we need that in all parts of the world. We're doing our best to change American politics on November 3rd. Believe me, we desperately need a new approach, and I hope that we become once again a partner for Europe in this. But I think Europe's leadership could be a big inspiration for the whole world. And I'm also happy to say in closing that Rome is host to the UN food institutions, to the Food and Agriculture Organization, a fantastic organization, and the World Food Program. So right in Rome, right in the spirit of Italy, you've got the chance to lead on this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. So Italy is in the center of the world about agriculture, about food, and Europe is really leading the way. That's very good to know. In Italy, we don't perceive this, but we should think it over and be proud of that and work on that more. I wonder whether Paulo de Castro can hear us, because we cannot see him, but we can hear his voice maybe. Hello.
Yes, I listen to you. I'm quite good with good connection. I don't know if you listen to me.
Yes, we can hear you very
So first
clearly.
of all, let me say thank you very much, Jeffrey. Good. I'd like to start saying thank you, Jeffrey, for introducing me, because Green Deal and Farm to Forks, this European strategy, is exactly what we are trying to achieve. And in the ground of what Andrea said, and thank you, and of course compliment to Andrea, was a great presentation. No matter that this is one of the most important challenges we have in front of us. The question is, as Jeffrey said, how we can achieve such result of virtuous agriculture. So European institutions start with Green Deal. Green Deal and Farm to Forks and the biodiversity strategy are the way that European institutions try to do some step ahead in a good direction. But we still need a lot of effort by the member state, because this is still a project at the European institution, but there's nothing yet in concrete by the legal point of view. So this will be our challenges in European Parliament, to try to apply such an incredible, important strategy in the next months, in the next years. So what we now expect to have is to increase the knowledge of people, where we are going, why we need to go there, why we need to introduce such important change in agriculture, which is as Andrea said in the presentation many times, is the core of the problem, the adaptation and mitigation of climate change. How agriculture in the next future can make a step in the good direction on that. That will be the CAP reform strategy. That will be what we are trying to do as European Parliament. But you know, member state is still important, and we need the member state can trust what the European institution is doing. So what we are trying to do in the next time is to have a more knowledge and more participation by the civil society. So this is why I many times said to Andrea that it's time to present Virtuous Agricultural project and in the European institution. Of course, now we have such pandemic, COVID, will be very hard to organize any event in the European Parliament. But I hope in the next months we can have a better situation, because we need to take a strong alliance with people, with the civil society, make people understand that we need to do more and how to do without losing agricultural production, because as Andrea said, we have an incredible increasing of food consumption in the future, in particular in Asia, in China, where the income per capita is increasing. And then we need, of course, to produce, but to produce more with less pollution, to produce more with take care about the land and the natural resources. So this is our main topics in the next months in the European Parliament. In my committee, in Agriculture Committee, is the main issue, how to translate this important goal inside of common agricultural policy, which is a strong and powerful policy that European institutions can manage to try to push our farmers to go in the right direction, introducing such carbon sequestration, carbon reduction, new organic farming, pushing organic farming more, and other things where we are working for. So let's go in this direction. I think this is a good step ahead in the United Nations approach and in the European approach. And I hope that this virtuous agriculture can be spread more and let people understand that we need to involve all of us. So I don't know if my connection is not very good, but I would like to say, go ahead with this intention, Andrea. Go ahead with this idea. I will do all my effort in European Parliament to try to spread this idea. And thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you for your work. We need a global food policy, have a global approach to try to make some step in the right way. Europe is doing the part, but now we have to see, of course, what is doing in the United States, if there are some change in the next months or not, and even in UK, because Brexit is another important task for us. So thank you very much. I don't want to talk more because I don't know if my connection is well enough, but let's say in the next opportunity to make again some step together. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you, Paolo. I wonder whether you can take a question. Can you still hear me? Because if you're not confident, we go ahead, and I understand that we also in Italy have some gap also of internet connections, and that this smart working really affected us, and we also have to deal with also with some digital.
Well, if there are some.
Are you still there, Paolo?
Collect some question, maybe it's better. No, I'm saying just if we can collect some question, maybe it's better than to try to answer directly by this not really exciting connection with me. So I be, and of course, I will be available to try to answer the questions.
Right. So thank you very much, Paolo. So I wonder whether Andrea and Jeff have some question for Paolo. If we can collect all our questions, since I see that in the audience no questions are still texted, but I wonder whether you want to interact among you. Andrea, what would you ask to Paolo? Because you said that European Union has a lot of subsidies on traditional agriculture, and that maybe I guess that if a large part of that would go to an agricultural transition, that would be good news for your model of virtuous agriculture. But what do you need? as president of a big food company, you don't need only money. You need a strategy. You need plans, consultancy, advisory. What would the entrepreneurs need to embrace this new model?
Well, the very fundamental resource is knowledge. And because most of the knowledge it's paradoxical that agriculture started, I don't know how many thousands of years ago, and we still don't know enough.
10,000.
Exactly. Okay, great. We still don't know enough. So knowledge needs to be really boosted now. And this goes along with scientific research. This is why I propose to bring this topic here, because we need to boost the research in agriculture and in nutrition together, building also this database. The market is gigantic, because we are talking about a 9 trillion food industry, and as I said, 1.5 trillion up to 3 trillion health budget. So if only a little fraction of this huge, let's say, GDP could be invested in synergistical research programs, this would be great. So this is one of the first questions I have for Paolo De Castro, if he sees as a, let's say, an outcome, a fallout, positive fallout of the farm to fork strategy, increasing the research budget and putting agriculture and nutrition into the research roadmaps of the United Europe. And the second question I have, just for the public, because I know the answer already, is the farm to fork strategy introducing some ambitious goals? Like, for instance, in reducing emissions or reducing pesticides, or agrochemistry in general, or carbon sequestration. Which kind of ambitious goals does it define?
Yes, that's really the question, in my opinion. And let's hear also if Jeff has some question for Paolo, maybe also comparing the strategy of the two candidates of the presidential elections in the United States, Biden Green Plan, and the totally absence of any green initiative of President Trump's side, compared to the European Union recovery plan. Because in my opinion, everybody is focusing on the energy transition, but my fear is that a large amount of money will be invested only in energy, but energy is just responsible for maybe 1/3 of global emission. Well, how about the rest? How do you see the European strategy, and what would you ask Paolo about that?
Well, just a word about the U.S. situation. We're still in a very primitive political stage because the U.S. traditionally was a petrostate. That is a politics where fossil fuels were the most important lobby, deeply interconnected also with our military and so on. So big oil was the most powerful political lobby in the 20th century in the United States. Trump is a classic reactionary politician, meaning he is trying to push America backward, maybe to something like 1960, of big gas-guzzling cars, big coal mining, big oil and gas. He lives in the past. He's trying to drag America with him into the past. But he has support among especially the oil executives, the coal executives, and sad to say, poorly informed people who live in states that produce oil and gas who think that's their only future. But it's no future at all. It's an industry that's going out of business, actually. And it's already happening with one bankruptcy after another because there's too much oil and gas in the world. There's a glut, not a shortage. And America has no future in that way. So we're in a big political fight right now, obviously. I'm sorry to say that a lot of the world's future depends on what happens in America. I wish the whole world could vote. Then I'm sure that Biden would win in a landslide. There'd be no problem. But the rest of the world doesn't have a vote, even though it's so much impacted by the United States. Think about it. Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. One country out of 193 countries. Trump just never says a word about pollution, environmental destruction, the need for renewable energy, land sustainability. It's a corrupt reactionary politics. We're doing our best, believe me, to make a reasonable partner for Europe again. I'm working with universities around the United States on our version of Europe's Green Deal. We're going to be presenting a study for both campaigns, although I think only one will be interested in it, on October 1. We call it a zero carbon action plan. It has a major land use component in it. So it talks about many of the issues we've been talking about: increasing soil carbon, reforestation, reducing farm loss. It points specifically to the farm to fork strategy of Europe. It points specifically to the European Green Deal as an inspiration. And I think that if Biden gets elected, there's a good chance we'll have, again, transatlantic cooperation and partnership on these issues. It's really important. What I'd like to ask to Paolo is how Europe's great university network could help him and his committee and the farm to fork strategy. We have hundreds of European universities as part of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, great universities all over Italy, Rome, Siena, you name it, Bologna, Padua, and so forth. Researchers want to support Europe's Green Deal. They want to do more targeted research. There's also a fantastic EU program called PRIMA, which I suppose Paolo knows very well about, headed by Angelo Riccoboni, professor at Siena. That's an agriculture research program that is for the whole Mediterranean basin, North Africa, as well as Southern Europe. So how can universities help you in moving this agenda forward? What kind of specific research or work with governments on specific pathways would be helpful?
So, Paul, could you hear the questions? I
yes, Laura.
Farm to Fork and the recovery funds and the university network.
Yeah. Well, let me say a first consideration about what Jeff said right now. Of course, when Europe is trying to do an important strategy with Green Deal and Farm to Forks and try to introduce this concept into the common agricultural policy, it becomes very hard if the United States go in the opposite way with the Farm Bill. Because as Jeff knows now, the administration is pushing a lot the U.S. farmer to go in the opposite direction. And that will be very, very difficult for us to maintain, this important target if we, at the end of the story, we need to compete in the global market. And that will be very difficult to have the two big policy, Farm Bill in one side and CAP in the other side, going in the different direction. That would be, of course, complicated for us because we have a farm community every day, of course. They say, look at what is done in the United States. Look at what they did. So that will be the problem. Secondly, well, university, Professor Riccaboni, many other friends are working hard to go in the good direction, to try to push all the university community to give an help on this. But now the question is, and Virtuous Agriculture can help because it's coming from an important food producer, you know, and to put together farm community, food producer, and these goals. Because if we don't put together, well, will be again a fighting between producers from one side and environmentalists from the other side. It doesn't work. We need to put together to have the same approach. So this is what I think and what the European Parliament is trying to do. But of course, all of us know that it's not easy. We need to do. Green Deal is a challenge. We are going there. We try. But of course, we need the whole global community can help in the same direction. Otherwise, the step will be very, very low. Thank you again, Jeff, and I hope to see you personally sometime.
I'm looking forward to it, and very clear instructions for us. We're going to redouble all the work between now and November and afterwards. So we're with you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Paolo, how about university network in Italy? Since you also serve in Bologna University, can really university, a big, powerful university network help European Union and people to understand how important, how crucial this topic is? I don't know if you hear us, Paolo. Let's see if he connects.
Well, university is doing their job. I mean, a lot of university now is very well connected and are trying to have a network on Green Deal. University of Bologna, of course, but not only, you know. So we are trying to have a European university connection and to spread this important task, to spread, to explain, to use the European institution now to try to explain that the step we have to do. University have instruments, but of course we need a politician, and we need a member state to follow us. But anyway, Riccaboni was a good example to explain in University of Siena, and the project for the North African countries is another step in the good direction. Try to go and to insist, you know, to spread this point. I mean, we are just starting now. Nothing is concluded. It's a very an important strategy to apply. And of course, we need a lot of effort on that. The university can help us.
Okay, thank you, Paolo. Thank you for your time. And
thank you, bye-bye.
Thank you. And please go on with these efforts, because we rely deeply on the next generation EU plan, also to go out of this terrible economic crisis, not only in Italy, in Europe, in the United States, you know, all over the world because of the lockdown effects after pandemic. So we rely on these funds, but we need that these funds are spent.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So thank you for your efforts, and please go on. So let's go back to some scientific point of view. Thank you. Since this is a scientific congress, and we have also some question about nutrition, I would go back now less on economics and more on the scientific side of the discussion for our last 20 minutes. And my first question, and then I will take the questions from the delegates. My first question is about soil to Andrea, because you talked about the virtuous agriculture, which begins with soil enrichment, with organic matter. So this would allow to sequestrate greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. But what organic matters? I mean, organic waste, because who sets the rule? I guess because this is not a certificated system. This is not like organic agriculture. Can you please explain better this enrichment, how would it happen, and who would certify that? Thank you.
Well, the soil behaves like a sponge. It absorbs carbon, but it also releases carbon under certain conditions. So what we need to do is now to enter in a virtuous cycle where the soil absorbs more carbon than it emits. And there are multiple ways. One of the important ways is, for instance, no tillage, because by tillage is one of the most important cause of release of greenhouse gases. Second very important one is using cover crops and rotating crops, particularly the leguminous crops are relevant because they enrich the rhizosphere in the soil and they increase the organic carbon. Producing compost is another way. Leaving the residues of the non-consumable part of crops is another way. And other ways are also to use, as you say, manure from animals. This is typical of integrated farming, agroforestry, and crop rotation, like for instance, strip agriculture where you have several crops is also very valid. There are many, and they also need to be integrated and dependently also on the starting point, because it takes a long time before you can really enter into, let's say, a fully regenerative agriculture. And it also depends on the starting point, because if the starting point are soils which are degraded by intensive farming, then it takes longer, and you also probably have to take a little compromise in initially reducing productivity before it gets better. So, but all in all these agronomical practices, we know some of them which are effective, but they need to be studied more thoroughly. Also because there is a saturation of carbon in the soil that might become counterproductive if you enrich soil with too much carbon, if this only triggers carbon's emission, you see. So this is what needs to be really thoroughly studied by crop, by region, by agronomical practices, and so on. So there is an infinite amount of knowledge to be generated.
Yes, thank
excuse
you.
me, you were mentioning also one day maybe there could be a synergy with waste management, because at the end of the day, compost created by waste, by the organic part of our waste, could be applicable as long as it is residue-free. So this enters in a new industry, which is certified compost, which can, nowadays, the compost produced can only be used in non-food agriculture, non-food agriculture with limited percent. But one day maybe we could accelerate that with a benefit also in the so-called circular economy, right? This goes integrated with agriculture.
Can we go back to who would certify this model, and what's the difference between a virtuous agriculture and organic agriculture or natural agriculture, which has, for example, a method certified and patented like Metodo Corino? Which is the difference that you see?
Well, in the model that I propose, I mean, it's just a proposal. There is no certification. There is a mandatory reporting system as long as you get the license of the the logo. So Virtuous Agriculture in the model that I developed is a logo that you get the license of the logo as long as you commit to publish publicly some of your agricultural data. So the consumer could technically go through a QR code and enter and see where the product is produced, with which agronomical inputs, with which environmental conditions and so on, and with which average chemical composition of the food produced. And another part of the knowledge, which is the secret one, would need to be filed and accessible for building the so-called big data. And as long as the system is then respected by the coalition of growers, let's say, working in such a way, we would need no certifications. And one of the reasons of two reasons why getting rid of certification are: one, certification refers to norms, set of rules. As long as you put set of rules, you make the system less flexible and less effective, because the only way to make this virtuous agriculture happen is to be totally flexible in seeking the best possible agronomical practices in the very unique condition of one specific farm in a very moment. And so please, no set of rules like in organic, which is defined by law. And now they are struggling because the law is too restrictive and they cannot increase productivity, and so they need more land. This is also creating. So I think it was excellent to start and to trigger a movement towards sustainable agriculture, but is not the end solution. And the second reason why no certification in my recommendation is because unfortunately, there have been so many fakes in this certification system, so much cheating, that unfortunately these certification schemes most of the time lost credibility. So if they lost credibility, why more of the same? Let's try through transparent information system like blockchain or others, and the consortium overseeing that system, that coalition of the virtuous agriculture, to obtain an even better result. That's aggressive.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you. Yes, I was looking at the questions, and one question arrived, but I will come to that later, because now I would like to ask a question to Jeff. Jeff, is this sustainable on an economic point of view? I repeat the question because, agricultural farmers say that organic agriculture is just for the elite, and it cannot actually work for the globe. Maybe because of what Andrea was saying, that certification is a nightmare and there are many fakes and not everybody has the knowledge. Knowledge is another important word that Andrea said. We need knowledge, not an inflexible set of rules. But so organic agriculture is worth only for a small part of agriculture. But would a virtuous agriculture be sustainable in the economic side, in your opinion?
I think there are a number of different issues here, but one is data. Yesterday, I was waiting for a package from e-commerce delivery, and I could track by the hour how it went to a warehouse, then it was on a truck, then it was in New York City delivery, and then I had been promised several days earlier that it would arrive on Thursday before 3 p.m. And it arrived at 2:58 in the afternoon, 2 minutes before the promised deadline. Now, this was a package that was shipped across the country, an international product that was made also internationally. But it's now straightforward, actually, to have a barcode data management for where your package is at any moment. And the same could be true with where your soybeans come from or where other products come from, which we need actually to be able to have standards and to be able to have respect for boundary conditions. Just to name one case which concerns me a lot, that's the destruction of the Amazon right now. First, a lot of the Amazon destruction is not because it's even financially attractive. The forest is slashed. Maybe a cattle ranch is in operation for a few years, then it's abandoned, and the land is deeply degraded, and the biodiversity is lost. So this is not because of some high return that we have to squander. This is an incredible waste, a thoughtlessness of resources. Now, we see a picture of the Amazon twice a day by low Earth orbiting satellites. We can see exactly where illegal deforestation is taking place. We could monitor products that are being produced in those areas and have them be unacceptable in international markets. We could have a barcode that tells you where your ingredients came from. The kind of blockchain idea that Andrea just said. We don't have these systems in place, but this is the nature of the digital age, that it's straightforward to have them in place now. I think it's extremely important because when narrow interest groups say, we're going to cut down the Amazon no matter what, they would not do so if they understood that their products were not sellable no matter what, that their products were only sellable if they had been sustainably produced. And I'm afraid that we're going to need that in order to have enforcement. We don't have right now timely data on soil carbon also. We don't have good monitoring systems. A lot can actually be done by satellite. Some can be done by remote sensing of ground truthing. All of it needs to be put into supply chain management in a far more sophisticated way than was possible even 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that all of the sustainability of global supply chains can be ratcheted up significantly. Germany, I know, is about to have new legislation in which their companies will be responsible not just for their corporate activities, but for the sustainability of the whole supply chain in which they're operating. That's a real conceptual breakthrough. It's hard work, but I think that it's worth it because in a global system, we need to be able to say that from the farm all the way to the fork, things are managed in a sustainable way. And now we need to combine the information management with this. Finally, let me say that there is really a set of important issues. There's a difference of organic farming, which can make sense in certain contexts, from sustainable farming, which may require fertilizer inputs other than green manures in order to keep soils healthy, for example. So organic farming is a very particular part of sustainable agriculture. For some people, it's everything, but for many of us who have looked at this for 20 years, we're very worried that you could not feed 8 billion people economically under the constraints of organic farming alone, especially in some tropical ecosystems where the nitrogen is rapidly depleted. And therefore, the question of nitrogen management is an extremely pertinent life and death issue for smallholder farmers. And one needs a strategy for that is scientifically based. It's also a more general point that a healthy diet, as I mentioned earlier, is an expensive diet. And from an economic point of view, we can afford that globally, but a poor household can't afford it individually. So it's one thing to say we should eat healthy, but it's another thing to ensure that people can do so with the kind of social support that they will need to do that. The poverty lines in many countries are not geared towards healthy diets, they're geared towards diets, unhealthy diets. And we need poverty lines and social protection systems that ensure healthy diets, not merely survivable diets. So I think that these are several facets of this important question. Organic, I don't believe, can be generalized to 8 billion people, though it has an important area. There's a difference, by the way, between organic and no pesticide. There's many different variants. And so labels get thrown around in ways that need much, much closer definition.
So thank you, Jeff. Now I suggest you for the last 7 minutes to answer to this question from a delegate and from 2 delegates, actually. I read them. In my experience, I have seen that people are extremely reluctant in changing their eating habits. Which do you think is the best way to change our food culture to eat better and impact less on the environment? This is a really important question. And another question is, all problems really seem to be huge. May we nevertheless be optimistic to be able to solve them? This is really the question. Andrea first.
So as far as dietary change, first of all, it's already happening. Diet is part of lifestyle, so it has a lot of social influence and trends. For instance, influencers are definitely triggering a movement towards vegetarian, pescatarian, and other diets for reducing meat in the most developed countries, whereas meat consumption is increasing in more developing countries. So, but one day that we will only have developed country with a balanced diet, I trust. And for sure, the driver of this dietary change is about health and well-being, also vanity in a sense, to be in a better shape is a paramount importance, and I think that you know, this modern society with social media can really build a lot of buzz and consequential, let's say, responses. We have already seen in the age of globalization which gigantic exponential growth of the number of SKUs that you can find in a supermarket, because there has been a cross-fertilization among diets, particularly the Asian and Middle Eastern diet together with the Western one. So I'm not too concerned. And I see the same answer, similar answer. The dynamics would be for the second question. Problems are huge, yes, but there is a book that God is a mathematics, because apparently everything in life, in the cosmos, is led, let's say, by mathematical laws. In this case, complex systems follow a non-linear mathematics. And non-linear mathematics, particularly for systems which are chaotic, are basically triggering substantial changes, transformation in systems when they attract, when they are facing an attractor. An attractor would be, in this case, a urgent need of sustainability, an urgent need for better health, which eventually focus the attention and resources of all zillions of different parts involved in nutrition and agriculture, always leading in the same direction. So I'm optimistic that in such a way a system can change. It's the same behavior for any system, political, sociological system, financial system, meteorological system, whatever you find. And I think it will work, and I'm quite optimistic about this kind of dynamics, which is already happening, though, for agriculture and nutrition as well.
Thank you, Andrea. How about you, Jeff?
I wanted to say that actually diets change very rapidly. 50 years ago, you didn't have 40% of Americans obese. Diets changed. In fact, it was our food industry, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, and so on, that brought really unhealthy diets to the American public. Heavily processed, laden with sugar, laden with the processed grains, and so forth. Similarly, the tobacco industry helped intentionally to addict generations of Americans to tobacco, and that's another habit that's really, of course, physically addictive, but we're seeing change as well. I think we need to follow what Andrea was emphasizing, is personal behavior, good health, and so forth. This is already leading to huge change. And part of the job is to ensure that developing countries don't follow the model of moving from their more traditional diets into the fast food, heavily processed, sugar addictive diets of American fast food industries. So it's not to make new habits, it's to stop them, bad habits from forming. So I think that there's actually a lot that can be done. And if we're smart and we have politics that's led by the common good, not by corporate fast food lobbies, we're going to have better food outcomes in the future.
So Jeff, thank you so much. I would like to express my congratulations for you for your next section about at the conference about human duties, not only human rights, but also human duties. I know that you are engaged in other 2 sessions in this great conference. And also congratulations on the recent publication of your new book, The Ages of Globalization. I bought 2 copies, one for me and one for one for my husband boss, so he could see what a smart family we are actually. So we thank you so much for doing that. Andrea, thank you so much for your efforts. We really need to address this great problem of traditional agriculture because as Obama said, and as many people said, we are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change, and unfortunately, we are the last generation that can do something about it. So let's remember this, let's act all together. So thank you both guys, and thank you all the delegates for their precious work. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.